Hello everyone, I'll be sharing with you the upcoming Sunday School lesson for October 16th. It comes from the book of Judges. It's called The Call of Gideon, coming from chapter 6 of Judges. Your lesson covers verses 1 to 2 and 7 to the first part of 16. However, the story of Gideon covers chapters 6, 7, and 8, and in order to get the best understanding, I would encourage you to read all three chapters, at least all of chapter 6. The time of the Judges was an interesting and important time in the life of Israel as land territory. Joshua had led the people to begin conquering this territory slowly but surely. The tribal leaders for these territories would be known as judges. We might use the word governors to get a better modern-day perspective. They were more like tribal leaders than kings. Some of them had prophetic gifts. Most of them were men, 11 out of the 12 that we find in the book of Judges. All of them served tribal territories. Although they did not explicitly represent the 12 tribes of Israel, there is some correlation. There are 12 judges referenced in the book of Judges. Now, they may have served during different time periods. I'm almost sure that they did, but all were chosen for the purpose of delivering their people from their local enemies. They lived in turbulent times. Perhaps the best commentary comes from Judges chapter 21, verse 25, the very last verse in the book. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did whatever seemed right to him. Now, although the word Israel is used to define the people, they were not one nation, not at all, not even close. Three of these judges are well known to us: Deborah, Samson, and Gideon. The other 9 are not so well known, so I will omit them as they are not critical to this lesson. But number 13, the 13th and final judge, becomes the bridge between the judges and the kings, and his name would be called Samuel. And we'll talk about Samuel next week. Gideon. Gideon's life story is told, as I said, in chapters 6, 7, and 8. The lesson in your quarterly only covers a small section, and that being the first section, Gideon's call by God. And so I would encourage you to take time, if you have, and to read beyond. Chapter 6, verse 1 tells us that the Israelites did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. Not a very good beginning. Thus God handed them over to the tribal clan known as the Midianites. The Learner's Guide on page 48 described them, the Midianites, as a confederation of desert peoples who were at times either in alliance with or at war with Israel. That's quite a good definition, very accurate. But at this time, they were at war. The Israelites were terrified of them and hid in caves and in the mountains and other relatively safe strongholds. Whatever they had planted in the form of crops, whatever they had tried to raise in the form of animals, the Midianites either destroyed or took. The Israelites were starving, literally starving. Verse 6 called them poverty-stricken. But in their pain, the Israelites cried out to God for God to send them a deliverer, and those prayers of desperation lead us to a man named Gideon. I break this down in my interpretation to 4 different points. The first being that God sends a prophet. In verse 8, it tells us that God sent a prophet. This is an unnamed prophet, but he does what prophets do. Prophets call the people back to God, and calling people back to God begins with a remembrance of all that God has done for them in the past. And so this prophet recounts the Exodus under Moses and Joshua, that God had given them the land, and all that God demanded from them was for them to remain spiritually pure. They were commanded to not worship the gods of the Amorites, the pagans, Unfortunately for them, they did not obey God, and now they were paying the price for their unfaithfulness. The second is that God sends an angel in verse 11. The word angel means messenger, God's messenger. Now, we don't know exactly the physical or human form that was taken, but we will see that this angel is given some special powers. But what is most important is not the angel's appearance, but the angel's message. The message was specific to Gideon. Gideon was to deliver Israel, this territory, from the grasp of Midian, and God was sending Gideon for this purpose in verse 14. Now, the third is the question, who is or was Gideon? Gideon thought he was a nobody. He was of the tribe of Manasseh. He was youngest in his family, so he thought he was basically not worthy to be called by God. One day he was threshing grain in a wine press. That's not normally where you thresh grain, kind of in the basement of something. But he did so because of fear of threshing the grain in the open air would bring the Midianites on the run coming to destroy what little bit he and his family had. The angel of God called Gideon a valiant or mighty warrior. It seems that Gideon could not believe this. It was almost laughable to him, but you can't refute or refuse God's special messenger angel. And then the last is the rest of the story. Now, your Sunday school book lesson will not give you the rest of the story. You'll need to go to your Bible and to search that out for yourself, to read what happens next. But I'll give you a summary here. Gideon proved to be a mighty warrior. He and his people won the battles against their enemies. But the main story is how God prepared Gideon in some unexpected ways. For example, Gideon had to tear down the pagan altar that belonged to his father. The men of the city wanted Gideon to be punished, to die. Gideon's father spoke up for his son, not for his idol. And there's a sermon in that story. Then there was Gideon's fleece, which convinced Gideon not only was God in this, but that God would work miracles. And there's another story in that as well. Now, God refined Gideon's army. Gideon began with 32,000 men, and this number was eventually whittled down to 300 mighty warriors who would go up against thousands and thousands of Midianites, but God would bring them victory. We find this declaration in these words, for the Lord and for Gideon. You notice who was first. The people put God before Gideon. Again, another sermon. Now, lastly, because Gideon proved to be such a superb leader, the people wanted Gideon to be more, to be like a king over them. To which Gideon replied in chapter 8:23, I will not rule over you, and my son will not rule over you. The Lord will rule over you. Again, another sermon. God bless. I hope you have a great week, and I look forward to seeing many of you Wednesday and then also Sunday. Take care.